With the Soviet Union having an absolutely massive tank force, having tens of thousands of tanks, with Russia inheriting a lot of these tanks, their reputation as a formidable tank force continued. With a decade of hard economic situation in Russia, followed with 2 decades of having limited economic capability to take care of a massive weapon stocks left by the Soviet Union, while trying to modernize their army overall, resulted in thousands of tanks being scrapped, and thousands more breaking down due to lack of maintenance and repairs. But with Russia having modernizing programs of their old tanks and continuing to produce newer tanks like the T-90, and with talks of introducing a brand new top-of-the-line tank, the T-14 Armata, things looked bright for Russia's ground forces, while there were several problems looming under the surface. With the conflict in Ukraine going from taking weeks to many years, the problems has accumulated with the Russian propaganda working hard to paint a picture as bright as possible. With claimed production numbers meeting demand and more, Russia, according to the Russian government and media, can continue producing tanks after their need, while Russia does their absolute maximum effort to produce as much material they can. The truth paints a far more dark picture for Russia. With the T-72 and the T-80 tanks not being produced anymore, only seeing modernizing upgrades from old tanks. With the T-14 Armata being cancelled or put on hold indefinitely, Russia only produces one tank from scratch anymore, the T-90 tank. And while Russia and even Western media claims Russia produces thousands of tanks per year, the reality is far from that. With the vast majority being upgraded tanks from the T-80, T-72 and even T-64, and the small minority being the T-90M tank. With thousands of tanks being lost, Russia is running out of their Soviet stocks, meaning once they're all empty, they will only be able to rely on newly produced tanks, which is the T-90 tank. But with thousands of tanks being claimed to be produced, how many are actually the T-90 tank? While exact numbers are hard to come by, there is a correlation that can be applied to check the information we can gather. The more T-90 tanks Russia have in their army, the more T-90 tanks Russia would lose. It's not a coincidence Russia is producing enough tanks to meet their loss rate, as it's actually the other way around. Ukraine is destroying as many tanks Russia is producing and using on the front line in attacks. So if Russia only would have 500 tanks per year they would attack with, they would only lose around 500 tanks, as their tactic and protection isn't adequate. So Russia is upgrading around 1200 tanks per year, is why they're also losing around that as well, making Russia's production rate determine how quickly they will run out of tanks. With the T-90 tanks suffering high losses as well, as Russia uses these in the same manner as their other tanks. Their survivability isn't much higher than their other less capable tanks. So looking at satellite images of tank storages, we can currently see no T-90 tanks in storage. With all new tanks being sent to the conflict, we can determine Russia's tank production both according to their own reports of newly delivered batches of tanks, combined with video and picture footage of the tanks being transported by train. As the tanks has to be delivered over long distances, Russia almost always uses train transport, with local people filming and uploading their shipment along the front line. Calculating these, we get a production of around 200 tanks. Not in the last year, not for 2 years, but for the entire 3 years the conflict has continued, with a yearly production before the conflict of around 40 T-90 tanks. Russia's ramp-up has been modest at best, of building newer and more sophisticated equipment, which becomes a lot harder for Russia to achieve by just pushing more money to the problem. With an average tank production of around 5 tanks per month, Russia loses more tanks in 2 days on average, meaning the remaining 28 days in the month, Russia is losing tanks from their storage. But the bad news doesn't stop there. As Russia has lost just around 200 T-90 tanks, with around 130 of them being the new T-90M tank. So taking around 200 T-90 tanks, of the around 4,000 lost tanks in total, the T-90 losses consist of around 5%, which would be around 60 tanks per year, of the claimed 1,200 tanks, which supports the estimated numbers in the last data we have. While this shows the unsustainability of Russia's tank losses, it could be fine if they had many thousands of tanks left in good condition. But with almost all remaining tanks being in poor or even scrap condition, being 30, 40 or even 50 years old, Russia's so-called tank production will have peaked most likely in 2024, going down in 2025 and seeing a sharper decline in 2026, making so Russia's tank losses will go down as there are fewer tanks on the front line. This will however make Russia less effective on the front line and increase Russia's losses as they replace their tanks with more non-armored and even non-military vehicles, sending out their troops with even worse equipment, leaving less for tomorrow. That's all I had for this video. Please like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching. Bye.